although not always existing in all the examples we're going to see, are the characteristic attitude, the specific tone of voice, and the normative bias. So for the characteristic attitude, it usually refers to a hostile or derogatory judgment, or a feeling such as indignation or contempt. The specific tone of voice usually refers to a flat or deadpan intonation, a slower tempo, lower pitch level, and greater intensity. Although this is not always present in all ironical utterances, it is still considered a very unique feature of this literary tool, since no other rhetorical device shares this consistency in intonation. And thirdly, the normative bias, that is to say, irony usually occurs in the context of a negative comment, like criticism, complaint, or when the event does not fulfill norm-based expectations. So why is it so difficult for children to acquire irony comparing to other figures of speech? If we give children an example of irony, for example, this is the most professional presentation ever in Chapter history. If you give this to children, and if they realize that this is not the case in reality, there are three possibilities. First, they might understand it as an error, and secondly, they might understand it as a lie, and thirdly, they might, if fortunate enough, understand it as an ironical utterance. So from error to lie to irony, the level of metarepresentational requirements accelerates, and it is very often, as we can see in experimental literature, that children consider an irony as an error or a lie. For error, they only need first order metarepresentation, so that's kind of the easiest. First order metarepresentation is like the attribution of false beliefs about the word. So they only need to know what is uttered does not match the truth in the word. That sounds so awkward. And to accurately identify a lie, however, it is more difficult because they need second order beliefs, which is how the speaker holds a belief different from what she utters. However, well, it is more difficult than an error, not only because of the metarepresentational requirements, but also because children would assume speakers to be honest and informative. Children assume speakers to be honest and informative due to their specificity of social learning. So like they rely on communication to learn and use language and the exchange of utterances as an opportunity to provide and receive genuine information. That's how they learn about the world from their caretakers and people around them, etc., etc. So that's why they would usually assume that people won't lie to them, but rather they set something different because they were mistaken. Irony is more difficult to perceive than deception. First of all, there is a study from Demarest and colleagues, and if we look at the data, children and adults consider deception more common than irony. If we ask 6-year-olds if we give them an ironical utterance, 94% are not going to get that it's irony, amongst which 58% would consider it to be a lie, and 36% would be sincere, true, or mistaken. And when it goes to 9-year-olds, 84% of them won't get its irony. They would think it's lies. And when it goes to 13, 71% perceive it as lies. In general, participants of all ages, even adults, would tend to misinterpret a neutral remark as a lie. Then, however, well, as we said, it is more likely for children to perceive interlocutors as honest communicators,
then it brings us the question of why irony is more difficult than deception, because in ironical utterances, the speaker is being honest rather than deceptive. Then why is it more difficult for children? I am going to explain it, hopefully, by quoting Nausicaa's study. So in Mazzarella and Pusculus 2020, yeah, it's just freshly published. They explained this by introducing epistemic vigilance. They said the ability to understand irony relies on epistemic vigilance towards deception, even though irony is a form of honest communication. Basically, it means, yes, irony speakers are honest, but in order to understand them, you have to first eliminate the possibilities of them lying. Like you have to first try to assess their like if there is the possibility of them lying. If I forgot to define epistemic vigilance, this is a concept first mentioned by Sperber in 1994. It refers to a suite of cognitive mechanisms that hearers use to be vigilant towards the content and the source of the information they take in. So children have to evaluate the content and the source of the information when they are given an utterance. According to Mazzarella and Pusculus, there are two stages of children's development of epistemic vigilance. The first stage is between naive optimism and cautious optimism, which means children start to recognize that speakers can have different knowledge, perspectives, and interests from their listeners, and thus they should not assume honesty when they are communicating with their with whoever are communicating with them. And also then from this naive optimism and cautious optimism, from this large stage, children would later, as they age, proceed to a higher stage called sophisticated understanding. That means children will start to understand how conflicting interests can cause a speaker to intentionally give false information, in other words, to deceive a listener. And yeah, that's the background information of epistemic vigilance. And if we look at irony understanding, according to this Mazzarella and Pusculus 2020 paper, in order to perceive that a certain utterance is ironical, children have to be aware of the triadic nature of irony. So that means, apart from the speaker and the listener, the ironic source to which the speaker attributes her dissociative attitude is also involved. And like this attitude would involve both the exercise of epistemic vigilance towards the content as well as the epistemic vigilance towards the source. And the hearer, in order to fully comprehend the ironic utterance, must grasp two things. First, the ironic speaker is making her attitude towards the echoed thought manifest. And secondly, the ironic speaker is communicatively intending to do so. So that would be an extra meta-representational step for children to take, because they must develop their epistemic vigilance also towards the capacity to be vigilant of the speaker herself. Thus, the children, when trying to access the possibility of irony, will have to attribute to the speaker the ability to evaluate the reliability of the source and to target her critical attitude at it. I hope you understand what I was talking about. That troubled me so much when I was writing the dissertation. To the next session of the second difficulty, children do not always make sufficient use of paralinguistic cues. So, first of all, according to the Ackerman 1983A paper, young children do not let the intonation impose an influence on their decision. So that is to say, when an ironic utterance appears in an ambiguous context, the effect of a stressed tone becomes stronger as the age increases. Like the third graders, for example, would use the tone much more efficiently as an aid. Like the stressed tone would help them solve more integration problems. But younger than that, like first graders, they don't really mind whether you have an intonation there or not. They are going to ignore it anyway. And according to Winner 1988, when there is an incongruity between behavior and utterance, children lean towards the latter. Like they usually think that a speaker's statement reflects more of a purpose, while the behavioral cues may not be intentionally manipulated. So the ability for them to judge a speaker's purpose, like basically the behavioral cues, for example, a smirk or something like that, is supposed to help the children realize that the speaker is not saying what they seem to mean, but children think the smirk matters a lot less than the uttered content, whatever that is. And last but not least, Ackerman, in his 1983b paper, says, children are easily distracted by cues irrelevant to the judgment of the intention. For example, the age of the speaker, the relationship and closeness of the speaker to the children themselves, etc. Like all of these could influence children as they try to judge the credibility of the ironic utterances. To difficulty 3, children also tend to encounter less of irony in their daily communication. Like the younger children are, the less likely it is that people would apply ironical utterances to them, at least directly to them. So according to Rekia, I hope I read their surname right. According to Rekia and colleagues, 2010, amongst hyperbole, understatement, irony, and rhetorical questions, mothers who are like the main communicator with children in these participating families, mothers seem to use rhetorical questions the most frequently and irony the least. So that could potentially influence children's familiarity with this very specific rhetorical device. Also, just to point out, in Rekia's original paper, they didn't say irony, they used sarcasm, but the definition of their sarcasm is my definition of irony. So that's why I kind of rewrote this quote, but in the original paper, it's sarcasm. And secondly, Mascarol and Morin, in their 2011 paper, described that children will be more aware of the potential of deceit as they enter school and receive more influence from peers. So basically, they are, as they age, they are more likely to experience communicators who possess conflicting goals or interests compared to their family members. And well, I also assume that similarly, it is much more likely that peers apply ironic utterances if they try to attack, but refrain from doing so in a harsh way. I think that's pretty much it. This is my bibliography, and thank you for not falling asleep or not leaving the conference halfway, hopefully. Sorry, it was not the most organized presentation, but I would blame it on, I would irresponsibly blame it on me being the first presenter, and I'm really, really super nervous. But thank you, and ask me questions if you would like to. Thanks, guys.